And just like that, it's over.
Over.
HBO has confirmed that, and just like that, the Sex and the City reboot won't be returning for a fourth season, which, to be honest, isn't a huge surprise. The show's viewership has been steadily dropping from season to season. Hate watching morphed from Reddit threads and snarky recap podcasts into mainstream media. The season 3 finale was disappointing, to say the least, and yet the news of the show's abrupt departure has been met with genuine heartbreak from so many fans online. And so, in this final and just like that video, or at least for the time being, I want to look back at what this show tried to be, how it came to exist in the first place, how its tone and structure evolved over time, and how, intentionally or not, it's just like that captured the essence of the early 2020s. You might be surprised to learn that the idea for And Just Like That didn't begin as a TV reboot, but as a podcast. During the pandemic, the cast and creators of And Just Like That, minus Kim Cattrall, reunited for Origins with James Andrew Miller, a podcast that looked back at show's history and legacy. That conversation apparently lit a spark, and Sarah Jessica Parker, the show's lead actress and executive producer, and Michael Patrick King, the showrunner, started throwing around the idea of doing their own rewatch podcast, like, so many actors were doing at the time. No, but truly, 2020 was the year of the plague, and by plague I mean the sudden boom where every actor decided to talk into a $300 microphone about that one thing that made them famous 20 years ago. Like, why did the world need not one but two different Sopranos podcasts hosted by actors from the show? As you can tell, I have a beef with celebrity rewatch podcasts. They're always just so unscripted, chaotic, and not that informative actually. Looking at you, are you a Charlotte podcast? Anyway, somewhere along the way, the And Just Like That podcast idea grew into something bigger. Eventually, Michael Patrick King decided simply to bring this iconic story and the characters back on screen. Especially because he still had the unused script for the Sex and the City 3 movie. So, as you probably know, Kim Cattrall had famously declined to return for a third film, and the project was officially cancelled in 2017. At the time, Sarah Jessica Parker told Extra TV, quote, "It's over. We're not doing it. I'm disappointed. We had this beautiful, funny, heartbreaking, joyful, very relatable script and story. It's not just disappointing that we don't get to tell the story and have that experience, but I think more so for that audience that has been so vocal about wanting another movie." End quote. Early headlines cited contract negotiations and salary disagreements as a reason for the third movie's cancellation, which is kind of ironic because if we were to believe Dumois, which shares celebrity gossip, so take it with a grain of salt, but in their podcast they alleged that the reboot was coming to an end due to pretty much the same reasons: cast salary and production cost. But with Kim Cattrall and the Sex and the City 3 movie, there was also a deeper issue. By 2018, several outlets were reporting that one of the film's proposed storylines involved Miranda's teenage son, Brady, who would have been around 14, sending... How do I say this? This video is going to get demonetized so quickly, so please, please, please hit that subscribe button and like this video so I'll get a little reward for making it. Thank you. Right, so the idea was that Brady was supposed to send deeply inappropriate photos and texts to his 50-something-year-old aunt, Samantha. And this is actually why in the first season of And Just Like That, Brady is portrayed as a horn dog, because I suppose that was a setup for that Samantha's plotline in the third movie.
I stepped on a used condom in Brady's room this morning.
Ew!
But wait, it gets worse. This wasn't the first time in the SATC universe that Cattrall refused to do a plotline involving Samantha and a minor. Remember the season 3 episode Hot Child in the City? It's the one where Carrie meets Power Lad, Miranda gets braces, and Samantha is hired by a rich and precocious teenager to plan her bat mitzvah. In the final version, Samantha ends up cautioning her not to grow up too fast, as the girl turns out to be sexually active. But originally... Let me just read this to you from the Sex and the City and Us book. Quote, in the original draft, the 13-year-old girl, played by Kat Dennings, and Samantha competed over their knowledge of fellatio. Cattrall refused to do the scene as written. This isn't about being conservative, she said. A woman would just never do that unless she's mentally ill. End quote. So, between those repeated creative clashes and I guess a growing sense that Samantha's storylines were being written for shock value and nothing more, it's not hard to see why Cattrall ultimately walked away from the franchise almost for good, minus a short cameo in the second season of It Just Like That. Another plotline that was carried over from the scrapped Sex and the City 3 movie was, drumroll please, the death of Mr. Big. Yep. That was already baked into the original film script in 2017. So, when season 1 of It Just Like That opened with Big's now infamous Peloton heart attack, it wasn't a reaction to the real-world controversy around Chris Noth and his cancellation, but it was a recycled storyline. One of the things that made Sex and the City so iconic was how it didn't just capture the zeitgeist of the turn of the millennium New York, but it literally created it. Besides shaping fashion trends and putting the hottest New York restaurants and clubs on the map, the show was constantly bringing up previously taboo topics about vibrators, breast cancer, fertility issues, and STDs, at a time when most TV series avoided them entirely. But when And Just Like That premiered in 2021, it was clear that the reboot wasn't going to be as revolutionary and culturally relevant. After watching only a couple of episodes, you could get the sense that the show was more reacting to the moment rather than creating it. And yet, across its 3 seasons, And Just Like That still managed, intentionally or not, that's beyond me to decide, to capture a massive cultural shift of the 2020s. Hear me out. Michael Patrick King began writing the first season of And Just Like That in the summer of 2020, in the midst of the United States reckoning with racial injustice. Again, going back to the original show, it is no secret that it had a big problem with diversity. For 6 seasons, Sex and the City focused almost only on wealthy white women, with characters of color shown rarely, and often in very stereotypical roles. In 2021, Michael Patrick King said, quote, when And Just Like That happened, there were 2 topics in the city, race and gender. There was no way in hell these characters were going to come back without being current, end quote. And it is safe to say that season 1 pushed very hard on being current. In almost every episode, Carrie, Miranda, and Charlotte were not only dealing with aging and family dramas, but they were also learning about gender and race from their new diversity friends. Before meeting Seema Patel, a glamorous real estate agent, Carrie, a woman in her 50s living in one of the most racially diverse cities in the world, somehow hadn't heard of the Valley. Before meeting Lisa Todd Wexley and her husband Herbert, Charlotte and Harry never had any black friends. Professor Nia Wallace helped Miranda grapple with her own white privilege. Additionally, many plotlines in season 1 revolved around social issues, like painting women's shelters, realizing your doll collection is racially insensitive, learning to respect they/them pronouns, speaking at Pride-adjacent events, or co-hosting an aggressively progressive podcast called X, Y, and Me.
Woke moment!
The show also attempted to touch on women's health with Charlotte's flash periods, Naya's deciding she didn't want to have kids, or Carrie's hip surgery. The 2020 global pandemic was also frequently mentioned, but the dialogues were often a lot to take at once. There were so many moments where it felt like the show was trying so hard to be politically correct that the conversation stopped sounding natural and turned out very performative.
And you look especially whatever acceptable, non-polarizing, gender-positive compliment you feel comfortable with.
Season 1 is also where Miranda kind of became the main character of the show. I'm assuming it wasn't a coincidence since Cynthia Nixon became an executive producer for the reboot and finally gained creative control over her storylines, which wasn't the case during the development and shooting of the original series. She even got to direct 3 episodes of the reboot, which is actually very impressive. But in season 1, the majority of big drama centers on and is driven by Miranda. Sure, Carrie's husband dies, which massively impacts her character, but it wasn't her choice. It just happened to her. She didn't decide to leave big after 15 years of marriage, for example. Whereas Miranda in season 1 decides to leave her husband, Steve. She wants to explore her sexuality. She develops a drinking problem and eventually starts an affair with Che Diaz, a queer non-binary character introduced in the reboot. Miranda also took the reboot somewhere the original series almost never went. Queer representation beyond gay men. In Sex and the City, we only got a few scenes, really, with Samantha and Maria, Charlotte and her power lesbians, and a scene of Carrie kissing Alanis Morissette in one of the earlier episodes. But actually, if you have Candace Bushnell's book around you, open it to chapter 20 titled When Mr. Big is Away, the Girl Comes to Play. You'll be surprised. Meanwhile, Charlotte's plotline and character's trajectory in season 1 revolves around accepting that her second child, Rose, came out as non-binary and changed their name to Rock. Now, I have to admit that I really enjoyed this plotline and absolutely loved Charlotte coming to her own as a mother and being just so full of love for everyone in her unconventional family. Beautiful storyline for her character. Looking at all 3 seasons of And Just Like That as a one complete piece, season 2 feels like the bridge between 2 very different shows. Season 1 is heavy, depressing, and dark. Carrie is grieving, and everyone around her feels so sad and joyless. Season 3, on the other hand, is insanely brightly lit, and its overall tone is very light and unserious. And so, in season 2, we are stuck somewhere in the middle. On the one hand, the creators still tried to touch on a variety of progressive topics, from polyamory or casual race microaggressions to the difficulties of having open and frank discussions about sex with your kids, or what it's like to return to work after years of being a stay-at-home parent. I really liked that the show attempted to discuss the ethics of surrogacy through Naya, who didn't want to have kids, and her husband Andre, who was the one to suggest a surrogate service, so she divorced him. Fair enough. Good for you, Naya. However, season 2 also kickstarted a trend that continued through season 3, which is the show's persistence in discussing sex in middle age, but almost entirely from men's perspective and health issues. Dry ejaculation, penis bumps, urinary problems, prostate cancer. Even pelvic floor exercises were mentioned in relation to men's sexual performance, not women's. And it's disappointing considering Sex and the City once won multiple sexual health in entertainment awards for its, quote, exemplary job incorporating accurate and honest portrayals of sexuality, end quote. Only back then, it was female sexuality they so honestly portrayed. And so, starting from season 2, And Just Like That often felt to me like it wasn't at all about exploring women's sexuality, but more about telling married women watching the show what's wrong with their husbands. And if that wasn't depressing enough, then LTW's storyline definitely was. So, Lisa Todd Wexley is introduced in season 1 as the woman who has it all. She's a glamorous documentarian, humanitarian, and a mother of 3. Her husband Herbert is a suave, successful, and good-looking finance bro who later decides to run for New York City comptroller to quote-unquote make a difference. And the whole family is just an image of perfection, affluence, and an aspirational upper-class life. In season 2, LTW's main plotline revolves around her constantly falling asleep in her closet and forgetting things. She forgets to book a van, then she forgets to order a cake for her wedding anniversary. Eventually, she discovers she's pregnant, and that's why she was so sleepy all the time. But this makes her spiral, how she's going to juggle between having a fourth child and her career. And so she has a conversation with her husband about whether she should, you know what? And here's the strange part. The word abortion is never spoken aloud in the episode, not even once. And in the end, the point is moved away because she miscarries in season 2 finale, and by season 3, her pregnancy is never mentioned again. Now, just to be clear, I am not trying to read too much into the creator's personal politics here, but it is surprising that a show with roots in Sex and the City, which once openly dedicated an entire episode to a frank discussion about abortion and treated it without any moral judgment, would suddenly avoid even saying the word. I don't know if this was an HBO decision to avoid controversy, maybe they didn't want outrage from right-wing publications, but it was a jarring choice for sure, and it definitely reflected the current regression towards cultural conservatism. To be honest, from that moment onward, and just like that, continued to avoid any controversial plotlines. By the time And Just Like That hit season 3, you start to wonder if someone swapped out the writer's cosmos for chamomile tea. The show's gotten so careful, so buttoned up, that nobody does anything remotely scandalous anymore. Seema dates Adam, the gardener. Miranda is in a very mature relationship with Joy, played by Dolly Wells, who's a lovely actress, but her character feels totally mismatched with Miranda. Then, in one of the episodes, Charlotte is offered to go snowing, if you get my gist, but she politely refuses. Then, there is a scene of her bumping into her husband with an unknown woman, who is his personal shopper. What, you thought? Don't be silly. Season 3 teases not one, but 2 love triangles. Carrie, Aidan, and her neighbor Duncan. And then LTW, her husband Herbert, and her editor Marion. But don't get your hopes up, nothing really happens. Carrie indeed ends up sleeping with Duncan, but only months after she and Aidan broke up. And actually, Aidan is the only character who does something morally transgressive. He admits he slept with Kathy, his ex-wife, when he and Carrie were still dating, only for her to forgive him instantly. Again, a lot of people have pointed out how much Carrie's character has changed in the reboot. Especially in season 3, Carrie felt very stoic, graceful, composed, and polished, which I think could be partially explained by the fact that in real life, Sarah Jessica Parker has learned how to ride the line between being Carrie Bradshaw and not being too Carrie Bradshaw. On the one hand, she's definitely leaned into some of Carrie's most iconic traits, especially her love for fashion. SJP launched her own shoe line, she has a perfume line, and she's a style icon. But at the same time, Sarah Jessica Parker has always been very quick to draw a line between herself and Carrie's more chaotic, indulgent side. In her 2023 The New Yorker profile, she said, quote, "I could never do any of that stuff in my life. It would be immoral. It would be unprincipled. An affair, husbands, kissing, buying, drinking, whims. LTW, on the other hand, spends the season apologizing for having a career. Yeah. There is an episode where her father dies, for the second time, and she misses his final call because she, quote, broke the sacred rule of mothers everywhere, end quote, and puts her phone on silent so that she could work in peace. Then her father passes away and she never had a chance to say goodbye to him, which I'm sure this unfortunately happens a lot, and this plotline alone is very relatable. But the problem is the number of times the show brings up the fact that she was working.
So I never really got to say goodbye because of work.
And while nobody says it out loud, this constant scapegoating has a flavor of, well, if LTW didn't work, she would have time for her family. Especially because in the next episode, her daughter tells her she's never at home, which, again, I'm sure many parents hear that often from their kids. And just like that, the Wexley's kids are never angry at their father for working or not being home. We never see Herbert being tormented by guilt and fear that he might be a bad father or that he's not doing enough for his kids. Whereas LTW repeatedly says that she's a bad mother and a wife, and all she does is think about her work, and apparently that's bad.
I'm a terrible mother and wife. I'm never here. I'm always tired. All I do is think about work.
One of the things that never changes across all 3 seasons of And Just Like That is how much the plot revolves around stuff. New York City is no longer the show's 5th character, capitalism is. It is truly insane how the writers are constantly using apartments, furniture, clothes, and other items that their characters purchase to communicate how they're feeling. Carrie's numerous apartment purchases and sales always show whether she's ready to move on with her life or not. In season 1, she buys that ultra-modern downtown apartment from Seema as her fresh start after Big's death, only to sell it almost immediately because she wasn't ready to move on yet. Then in season 3, Carrie decides to sell her iconic brownstone because it was filled with so much history and baggage, and splurges on that massive Gramercy townhouse so that she, Aiden, and his kids can once again start anew and live there happily ever after. Then there is Carrie's garden. Adam spends almost the entire season landscaping it, only for her to decide in the final episode that she changes the vision. And instead of this clean and traditional garden, she wants him to do something more wild, more me, which again is meant to symbolize Carrie's emotional change and acceptance of who she is. She's this wild and free woman who isn't caged in a relationship, and I guess her garden needs to reflect that. There were also so many plot lines about shopping, I guess. Lily sells her Chanel dresses on the Real so she can afford a keyboard. Miranda's whole alcoholism arc kicks off because she drunkenly orders a self-help book on Amazon. Charlotte buys a pink belted Valentino dress, and that whole belt debacle. The multi-episode saga over a vintage coffee table. In season 1, there was also a plotline about Carrie's hip surgery, which the show explained away as a congenital defect. And over the years, many people have pointed out that if anyone earned a hip replacement from 30 plus years of wearing high heels every day, it's Carrie. And her stiletto obsession should be the reason for her surgery. But do you guys know that It's Just Like That would never blame the shoes, right? The designers get publicity, the show gets free heels, and nobody wants to mess up this mutually beneficial deal by admitting stilettos might actually wreck your joints, so we just pretend it's genetics and keep strutting. Over 3 years ago, I made this video. I vividly remember that it took me only 4 days, and it was probably the fastest video I ever made. And at that time, I had no idea that there was a companion podcast to the show, a documentary about the making of season 1, and so much more content surrounding the reboot. But what strikes me about that video now is what I wrote on a thumbnail, because let me ask you this. Having watched all 3 seasons of And Just Like That, what do you think this show was about? Friendships? I wouldn't say so. Carrie, Miranda, and Charlotte often felt to me more like distant relatives rather than besties, like they were forced to socialize with each other simply because they're family. Well, then maybe it is about having a community. Again, no it isn't. Have you noticed how the original characters kind of felt like they had spent the last 15 years in a coma? Like, Carrie's husband of 15 years dies, and yet Steve and Harry, his golf buddies, never even mention him. The same goes for Brady and Carrie. She's his godmother. We saw her babysit him back in season 6 of Sex and the City, but in And Just Like That, they barely interact. So, what was this show about? Now, having listened to the Writers' Room podcast, I can tell you that, according to the writers on And Just Like That, Sex and the City's main thesis was that the life is made for couples, and it's awkward to be single, especially to be a single woman. So, returning for the reboot, they took that idea even further, and the main thesis for the show was, life in your 50s is awkward, and it's awkward to be aging. Their words, not mine. And if that was the main thesis behind this show, then congrats, the creators successfully defended it, because this extremely negative and clearly wrong outlook on life ended up dominating the entire show and the way it was written. Every young character was made to seem obnoxious, awkward, bratty, or spoiled, and their only real crime was just being younger than the main cast.
I was just trying to help. What'd I do wrong?
You're 25. That's your crime. You'll understand one day, I promise.
Parenting was painted as exhausting, thankless, and lonely. Like, we rarely saw Charlotte or LTW have any genuinely good moments with their kids. I'm glad that the show didn't romanticize having kids, but it made it look like a miserable and lonely experience. And look, I try to be sympathetic here. I actually get it. The people behind this show are working in a cutthroat industry. Everyone is always searching for the next big thing, the next new phase, the next talent, and it's tough to maintain a long career in Hollywood. And I guess it must be painful to watch your influence and fame slipping away. That's why I think in season 2 there was that small subplot about Carrie no longer being this it-girl celebrity author that she used to be. But here's the thing, all that self-loathing didn't help anyone, really. Not the creators, not the SATC fandom, and it definitely didn't do much to shift public opinion about what midlife can look like. So here's my hope. Maybe in 3 or 5 years we'll get And Just Like That, the movie, and maybe, just maybe, we'll get a better, more hopeful ending to the story than whatever that season 3 finale was. I want to see our ladies a little less bitter and a little more optimistic about aging, parenting, and friendships. And I hope you'll stick around for that too. But for now, thank you so much for watching, for supporting my channel, and for making it all the way to the end of this video. Please like this video and subscribe, please really subscribe to my channel, and have a great day, and I'll see you soon. Bye!